brown feather out of her teeth, glowering. "Oh," Clearsight stammered, It's complicated. There are so many consequences, and spells can go wrong, especially with a war scenario where it's all so chaotic. It's kind of an unspoken rule that tribes don't use animus magic in war, isn't it? Because if we use animus magic, then they might retaliate with animus magic, and then it gets, well, really bad." So bad, her brain was already starting to hurt, tracing the possibilities. Queen Vigilance picked up a scroll and hurled it at the door with a loud thump. Immediately, one of her guards poked his head inside.
"Yes, Your Majesty," he said.
"Bring me Darkstalker," she ordered. Clearsight twisted her front talons together. "I'm not sure this is a good idea," she said. I didn't calculate animus magic into my predictions for the next year. It'll throw everything off." The Queen selected one of the blank scrolls from the rack behind the librarian's desk. She swept all the history scrolls off the table in front of Clearsight and slapped the blank scroll in front of her. "Start calculating," she hissed. Yes, all right," Clearsight said, sitting down. Visions were already crowding in, trying to fill the space of these new ripples, new timelines unrolling. There were too many new futures all of a sudden, ones she'd never even glimpsed before. Some of them wrapped back around to link up with previous visions, Darkstalker in the crown, or them with their dragonettes, but some of them spilled out into awful new directions. Never let the Queen find out about Darkstalker's scroll. That was the first, most obvious lesson of her visions. If Vigilance ever discovered it, she'd have Darkstalker killed. If she could. It wouldn't be easy. Clearsight could see hints of that. And then she'd use it herself. And, like Snowfox, Queen Vigilance also had no problem with wiping out entire tribes. A continent ruled entirely by Nightwings would be fine with her. Wing beats sounded outside, and Clearsight looked up to see Darkstalker swoop by the window. Her heart jumped, happy to see him, terrified about what might happen next. A few moments later, he came in through the giant double doors of the library, already smiling at the Queen. That smile, it was new, and Clearsight didn't like it. It was an everything's fine smile. It was a bad things can't happen to me, and so I won't let them happen smile. And Queen Vigilance might not realize it, but it was a better not stand in my way while I arrange the world the way I want it smile. Clearsight knew that there were only 3 dragons Darkstalker loved: herself, Whiteout, and his mother, Foeslayer. She thought Fathom might be on the list too, either now or one day, but she wasn't entirely sure. Sometimes she worried that Darkstalker was friends with him only because Clearsight thought they should be. But he truly loved Foeslayer, and losing her, she knew he must be furious and devastated and broken into 1,000 pieces on the inside. It scared her that he could hide it so well. "Darkstalker," said the Queen. "Unfortunate about your mother." "Yes," he agreed. "Very unfortunate." "That was always Diamond's first demand," Queen Vigilance said, studying him. "She wanted Foeslayer, and Arctic, and you and your sister." He bowed his head slightly. "Thank you for not giving us to her." "Well," she said, "I had my reasons." She left a significant pause. "You were hoping to use our animus magic yourself," Darkstalker filled in pleasantly. "And you feel that you've been very patient, and you think now would be a good time for some return on your investment. What did you have in mind?" Queen Vigilance held herself very still, as if she had just discovered Darkstalker could read her mind and was trying not to show how surprised she was. She thought she was better at shielding her thoughts, Clearsight guessed. She didn't realize Darkstalker's powers were so strong. The Queen said slowly. "I'd like to hear your ideas." "Oh,"
I have a few, Darkstalker said with a jaunty smile. Clearsight, darling, may I?
He crossed to her table, slid the blank scroll over to his side, and started sketching.
Let's see. Clearsight warned me that killing Queen Diamond at this point could lead to the destruction of the entire Nightwing tribe. But what if we get them first? Imagine if I could take a stick, any ordinary stick, and say, I enchant this stick so that the moment I break it, every Icewing in Pyria will keel over dead.
He tapped the scroll, where he'd drawn a thin line snapped in half, a dozen bleeding corpses all around it. Clearsight stared at him in horror. Vigilance's eyes were shining. You can do that, the Queen whispered greedily. It's that simple.
I'm not sure, Darkstalker said with a shrug. No one's ever tried to wipe out an entire tribe with one spell before, as far as we know.
He shot one of his new, unsettling smiles at Clearsight. But that spell would kill you, Clearsight said. You're part Icewing, and your father and your sister.
We could include exceptions, I'm sure, he said.
You can't wipe out an entire tribe, she said, more firmly. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of innocent Icewings. Think of all the little dragonettes who aren't part of this war. You're not a dragonet killer, Darkstalker. I didn't think you were an anyone killer, actually. Not now. Not the version of you I thought I knew and could safely love. But maybe I'm wrong. Not to mention what it would do to your soul. He gave her an ironic look. You know perfectly well it won't affect my soul look. She felt a twist of fear in her stomach. She'd thought putting his magic in the scroll would protect him, but if he wasn't worried about his soul, did that mean there was nothing to hold him back?
Those little dragonettes will grow up to be part of this war, he pointed out, unless we stop them. And isn't tribal genocide exactly what you foresee them doing to us?
No, she said. Only if things go very, very wrong, and we won't let that happen. She turned to the Queen. Killing all the Icewings would turn the other tribes against you. It makes things worse. I know it does. Worse by Clearsight's definitions, anyway. She didn't have to tell Vigilance about the futures where an Icewing genocide led to the Nightwings ruling the whole continent.
Well, Darkstalker said with a shrug, if this is too effective for Clearsight's delicate sensibilities, perhaps we could do something more targeted. I could enchant a pile of rocks, let's say at least 100, which, when dropped on an Icewing encampment, or hidden in the sand where they'll pass by, would explode and kill every Icewing in sight. Then we'd only hit soldiers. Probably. Would that make you feel better, Clearsight?
She turned away from him. She couldn't bear the look on his face, or the Queen's, so pleased with her own wicked ideas. I need to study the consequences, she said. Give me some time to trace the futures before you do anything. Please.
You're a seer, too, the Queen said to Darkstalker. Can't you see these consequences?
Some of them, he said, studying Clearsight sideways. She lifted her chin. Was he going to take her job? It wouldn't be hard to manipulate Vigilance if he became top seer. If he decided to do that, he'd be able to make the Queen do almost anything he wanted. Darkstalker shifted his wings, as if he were shrugging off a blanket.
But Clearsight's visions are clearer than mine, he said.
He spread one wing around her, giving her a reassuring hug.
She spends a lot more time studying them than I do. Thinking about the future is basically what she does all the time. If she wants to check all the timelines first, I suppose that's probably a good idea.
He's still in there, behind the fake smile and the angry ideas. He'll calm down and come back to me, she thought. She hoped.
What about defense? The Queen asked. The Icewings have their cliff that kills anyone who's not an Icewing. Can we have one of those?
We don't want to keep out all the other tribes, Clearsight interjected quickly. The Nightwings are famous for our intertribal relations and open trade partnerships. Our scrolls and artwork are sold across the continent. Dragons bring us new ideas and inventions and discoveries from all over. If we close our border, especially with violence, we lose all of that. We lose everything that makes us who we are.
Pfft, the Queen spat. So maybe it just kills Icewings, Darkstalker said.
He took his wing away from around Clearsight and leaned over the table, sketching again.
An invisible shield, around the whole kingdom perhaps. That would free up your air defense teams to join the attack.
His dark eyes met Clearsight's.
Seems reasonably harmless. Even you can't object to defending our kingdom from our enemies, right, Clearsight?
It was one of the least terrible of all the bad options, and it would appease the Queen for a while. Clearsight nodded reluctantly. As long as there's a way to disable it in the future, when we're at peace with the Icewings again.
That's never going to happen, as long as they have my mother, Darkstalker said coldly.
Get started, Queen Vigilance said, rapping the table once with her claw. She pointed at Darkstalker. You, the shield. Her sharp eyes shifted to Clearsight. You. The future's where we crush our enemies with magic. She smiled, a thin, sinister smile. We're going to make an excellent team. The Queen turned and swept out of the library, leaving scrolls fluttering in her wake.
Better not tell Fathom about the shield, Darkstalker said to Clearsight. Or any of these ideas. He's already driving me crazy with his high-anxiety brain, wondering how soon I'm going to snap.
He rolled his eyes. What is happening to you? Clearsight demanded. She poked Darkstalker in the chest. You're not a mass murderer. You don't want to spend your magic on making war and killing easier for the Queen.
It's not for the Queen,
Darkstalker said, catching her talon before she could poke him again.
I want to teach the Icewings a lesson. I want to scare them into giving Mother back.
Clearsight wavered. Oh, Darkstalker.
You don't see a future where she comes back, he said grimly.
She shook her head. She didn't know what to say. She'd been searching for days, trying every possible timeline, and she couldn't find Foeslayer anywhere. It was as though Diamond had erased her from the map and from the future.
Neither do I,
he said. His wings slumped slowly down behind him.
I've done 3 spells that should have brought her home, but none of them worked. And I tried to reach her with the Dream Visitor. I've been trying around the clock since she left, but nothing. It would only work if she was asleep, but she must sleep sometime. Unless she's already dead.
What does your map tell you? Clearsight asked.
The dot has moved to the Ice Kingdom. Far, on the other side of their wall, Darkstalker said. It's been in the same place for the last 2 days.
That doesn't mean, Clearsight started.
That she's alive. I know. It could be showing me where they buried her. I suppose I could enchant something to find out for sure.
His voice suddenly cracked, and he dropped to all fours, leaning into Clearsight's shoulder.
But I don't want to know that, Clearsight. I don't want anything to tell me that she's dead.
He buried his face. I'm sorry, my love, Clearsight said. I know it's the worst thing, she said through her tears. I know it hurts, and you're not all right, and you're angry, and you want to punish the Icewings, but you have to fight the anger and the darkness. Darkstalker, I'm so scared. The things I've seen in the future because of this, the things that happen to you, the things that you do, and what you become. It's all so dark. I almost can't see the light anymore. I'm afraid we're losing our bright paths.
Stop,
Darkstalker said. He sat back, brushing tears out of his eyes.
Don't give up on me, Clearsight.
I'm not, she said faintly. He put his talons on either side of her face, looking into her eyes.
Believe in me. Keep looking at our happy futures, and I will too. If we can just stay focused on those, we'll get there. I promise.
She nodded, because she didn't want to make him feel worse right now. But with Darkstalker's sketch of dead ice wings on the table right beside them, it was hard to believe in any kind of bright future at all. Chapter 23. Fathom. It was raining, endless and drizzly and gray from horizon to horizon. Fathom rested his chin on his talons, staring out the window. Indigo and Worf were in his room too. Worf was sharpening weapons, and Indigo was writing a letter home to her father. Lionfish was supposed to be out hunting, but Fathom guessed he had taken refuge from the rain in one of the busy restaurants or museums somewhere in the city below. Fathom glanced across the room at Indigo. He wished they were alone, although it was safer for them not to be. He wished he could go over there and flop into her side and fall asleep with her back rising and falling peacefully below him the way he used to. He wished he could lean against her shoulder and read a scroll with her and tell her all the things he was worried about. Although really, it was just one thing. Darkstalker. Sad, furious Darkstalker, who'd been in mourning for the past 3 weeks, but a strange kind of angry mourning, where he kept insisting his mother would be home soon. Fathom hadn't even seen his friend at all in the last 2 days. Clearsight was still around, but she was always in the library, or her room, with her nose in a scroll, and she looked so anxious all the time that he didn't want to bother her. Last night, she'd come to his room for dinner. Well, dinner for him, breakfast for her, and she'd been more talkative than usual about her power. He hadn't realized how complicated it was, or how many different versions of the future she could see. It almost sounded worse than not being able to see the future at all, but of course, he hadn't said that to her. Clearsight had finally buried her head in her talons with a sigh. "The hardest thing about being a seer," she'd said, "is that the future is always a million possibilities. I can see so many ways my life could possibly go, but the past is only one thing. Once something happens, that's it. I can't change it anymore. I can't do anything. All my possibilities narrow into one fixed life, and then we're trapped in that world. I think I can control the future, but the past, it's gone. I can't fix it anymore." Fathom knew a lot about wishing he could change the past, but he'd never felt any kind of control over his future either. It was sort of mind-boggling to think about. As if his thoughts had summoned him, a gleaming wet figure appeared outside, winging his way toward Fathom's balcony. Darkstalker swooped in and shook himself grandly, scattering water everywhere. "Hey," Indigo objected, covering her letter to keep it dry.
"Hey,"
Darkstalker replied offhandedly, without looking at her.
"Fathom, there's an epic lightning storm coming. Want to fly up to the Royal Tower and watch it with me?"
"Sure," Fathom said, jumping to his feet. "Isn't the tallest tower in the castle exactly the wrong place to be in a lightning storm?" Indigo objected. "Not to mention flying while there's lightning doesn't sound like a great idea."
"We'll be fine," Darkstalker said dismissively. "You can stay here."
She gave him a "when the kingdom of the sea freezes over" look.
"Oh, Darkstalker,"
Fathom said, hurrying over to his desk.
"I finished the carving for you."
He picked up the sea wing statue he'd made for Darkstalker, turning it over between his talons so he could check the little webbed claws and the graceful curving neck. He liked the intelligent expression on the wooden dragon's face, although he had to admit that it made the miniature dragon look unmistakably like Indigo. Would Darkstalker notice? Would he want a statue that looked so much like a dragon he didn't seem to particularly like? There was something odd about Darkstalker's expression as he took the carving, a funny combination of triumph and regret, perhaps. He did glance at Indigo, maybe noting the similarity, but when he turned back to Fathom, he was smiling.
"This is so cool," he said. "Thanks, Fathom. I got you something too."
He reached into a pouch around his neck and pulled out a goblet, made of shimmering sea-green glass, the same color as Fathom's scales, and imprinted with a pattern like ocean waves.
I was in the market and saw this, and it made me think of you.
Wow, Fathom said, delighted. He took the goblet carefully and cupped it in his talons. It reminded him of home, of swimming through sunbeams after pods of singing whales.
I found Clearsight a pair of moonstone earrings to match her bracelet, too.
Darkstalker touched his pouch thoughtfully. He finally seemed to be in a much better mood than he had been in weeks. His eyes were bright, and his wings snapped sharply instead of drooping under the weight of his mother's loss.
You seem happier,
Fathom observed cautiously.
I am, Darkstalker said. I'm finally doing something about all my most annoying problems.
He tossed his head with a grin.
I mean, I'm Pyrio's most powerful dragon, aren't I? I shouldn't have any problems.
Fathom wasn't quite sure how to respond to that. Every dragon had problems. And how exactly was Darkstalker dealing with his? But he didn't want to push Darkstalker away, now that he finally seemed to be coming back. He'd bring it up again later. He carried the goblet over to the fountain to fill it with water. He wished he were as small as his carved sea wing, so he could dive into the green glass bowl and swim around. He lifted it to his snout to drink. The blow was sudden, knocking him sideways as the goblet flew across the room. It smashed into the marble wall and shattered into a million tiny green shards.
Why did you do that?
Darkstalker roared at Indigo. For a moment, he looked consumed with rage, fire crackling through his veins as he glared at her. Fathom stared at Indigo, his ears still ringing. She faced Darkstalker, her chin raised defiantly. I saw the way you were watching him, she said. There was a spell on that cup. You couldn't wait to see what was about to happen. What was it? What were you trying to do to Fathom? Across the room, Worf looked up, confused. Darkstalker spread his wings, looking deeply injured. His rage vanished as quickly as it had appeared.
It was not Animus touched. I didn't do anything to it at all. I just thought it was beautiful and that Fathom would like it. You have an overly suspicious mind, Violet.
Indigo, Fathom corrected him automatically, dazed.
I'm sorry about your present,
Darkstalker said to Fathom, sweeping small green pieces into a pile with his tail.
I'm pretty sure it was one of a kind.
He narrowed his eyes at Indigo. I swear he did something to it, Indigo said to Fathom. I don't know what. I can only imagine. Something horrible and manipulative, I bet. She glared back at Darkstalker.
Oh, Indigo,
Fathom said.
I'm sure it wasn't enchanted. Darkstalker wouldn't do that to me, right?
Darkstalker nodded, putting one wing around Fathom's shoulders.
Of course I wouldn't, he said. I can't believe anyone could even think that.
She's being a good bodyguard, Fathom said, although honestly, he was pretty upset with her. No one had given him something that could be called treasure in a very long time, and the goblet had been so beautiful. And now it was so gone. Darkstalker sighed.
Well, let's go to the Royal Tower before we miss the lightning. I'll leave this here so it doesn't get wet.
He set the sea wing carving down on Fathom's desk, tapping its nose gently. Indigo turned, her shoulders tense, to reach for her wet weather flying gear.
Actually, Fathom said, I think maybe Worf should come with me this time.
The thick-headed guard fumbled his knife and looked up at Fathom, clearly startled. Indigo stood with one hand on her spear, her face a mess of hurt and disbelief.
It's not you, Fathom wanted to say. It's not because you broke the goblet. It's because of the way Darkstalker is looking at you right now, and the fact that he's looking at you so closely at all. And it's just that I think everything will be easier and safer if you quietly fade into the background for a while. That's all. It's not a punishment. I'm upset with you, yes, but I know why you did what you did, and I want you to stay here so you'll be safe.
Of course, he couldn't say any of that in front of Darkstalker. He'd have to explain when they got back. Worf lumbered to his feet and wrinkled his snout at the pouring rain outside.
We're
going out in that?" he asked.
Yup,
said Darkstalker.
you have gills. I think you'll survive. Let's go.
He dragged Fathom to the balcony, with Worf following sullenly behind them. Cold drops of rain pelted Fathom's snout, and lightning crackled in the distance. He glanced back at Indigo, but she'd returned to her letter and didn't look up. As they stepped out onto the balcony, Darkstalker opened his pouch again.
Want to see the earrings I got for Clearsight? He asked Fathom. I'm so excited about them. Shoot, my pouch is all dirty from that squirrel I caught yesterday.
He shook some dirt and pebbles into his talons, shaking his head, and tossed it all over his shoulder into Fathom's room.
Here they are.
He held out the earrings, beautiful milky orbs like translucent moons, and Fathom agreed that they were perfect for her. They flew off to the royal tower, and the whole way there, Fathom kept telling himself he didn't have to worry. He'd be back soon, and then they would talk, and Indigo would understand. He'd convince her to be less paranoid about Darkstalker's intentions and more careful about picking fights with him. Everything would be fine. They returned through the winding interior of the palace instead of flying in the storm again. There was enough lightning outside at this point that most sensible dragons were staying safely indoors. Worf stomped behind Fathom and Darkstalker, dripping on the white carpets, clearly grumpy about being forced to do his actual job. Fathom had a feeling something was wrong as he approached his room, although he wasn't sure why. Everything seemed normal from the outside. It was very quiet, but that wasn't surprising, with only Indigo inside. Still, a strange, worried sensation was crawling up the back of his throat as he pushed open the inside door and realized that the room was completely dark.
Indigo?
He called.
She's not here,
Worf said. Although that would have been obvious even without their night vision. The room felt abandoned, like a snail shell with a snail sucked out of it. Beside the balcony, the curtains wafted in and out. Darkstalker stepped inside first and glanced around curiously.
But
where would she go? Fathom asked.
Hunting?
Worf guessed.
Swimming? Out for a walk? Gone to give her letter to the messengers?
Those were all reasonable guesses, if it hadn't been pouring outside. But Fathom had a distinctly unreasonable feeling about this.
Worf, go check the kitchen and the messenger center, he said. Please.
All right, Worf said, with a long, drawn-out sigh. As the door closed behind the guard, Fathom crossed to the balcony and peered out at the furious downpour. Indigo wouldn't have gone out for any reason in this weather, surely. Behind him, Darkstalker breathed a burst of flame to light the lamps by the door and the 2 candles over the fireplace. Fathom heard him walk across the room and then pause. A moment later, Darkstalker let out a small murmur of surprise, and Fathom turned around. Darkstalker had picked up the lamp on the desk and now stood there, looking down at something.
What is it?
Fathom asked, hurrying over. His friend pointed at a damp, torn scrap of scroll lying on the desk. On top of it, holding it down, was the wooden sea wing Fathom had carved, and the handwriting on the paper was clearly Indigo's. Fathom, I'm sorry. You were right. I don't feel safe here. It's not worth the risk. I'm going home. Please don't use your magic to find me. Good luck. Indigo. The earth dropped out from below Fathom's talons. He was floating over an abyss, all the light suddenly hollowed out of the world. His eyes were stuck on the crossed-out words.
I don't.
What? Love you? Want to be with you? Trust you anymore?
How could she leave like that, without saying goodbye?
It didn't feel like something she would do at all. But maybe it was the smart choice. This was what he'd wanted her to do, wasn't it? Get far away from him so she could live a normal life? Still, He couldn't believe she was gone.
Sorry, Fathom, Darkstalker said sympathetically. She was a really great bodyguard.
Fathom nodded, too shocked to respond. He picked up the sea wing carving and traced the curve of her neck. She really looked so much like Indigo.
Hey, Darkstalker, he said. Would you mind if I keep this, actually?
It seemed like Darkstalker hesitated for the briefest moment, but Fathom must have imagined it, because almost immediately the Nightwing nodded and pulled Fathom into a hug.
Of course, Darkstalker said. Of course you can keep it, if that's what you want. Although, things that remind you of her probably aren't going to make you feel better.
I know, Fathom said, but he set it back on his desk anyway. He needed it there. Maybe it would hurt to look at it, but it would also remind him that Indigo was out in the world, having adventures and a great life, somewhere where she didn't have to worry about animus magic, or what Fathom might do.
I'm on my own now, he realized.
Well, sort of. At least he still had Darkstalker and Clearsight. They still believed in him. If Indigo didn't anymore, that was only logical. He sighed. This was probably for the best. At least she was safe now, wherever she was. Safe from him. And safe from animus magic forever. Part 3. Chapter 24. Clearsight. You can see the whole Great Diamond from up here, Listener said, stretching her long neck to peer out Clearsight's window. By the scorching, is the entire tribe coming to this festival? No, Clearsight peeked over her shoulder. The enormous piazza below them looked like it was swarming with fireflies. In the lights from the hundreds of lanterns, she could see dragons everywhere. Don't forget all the soldiers out defending the kingdom. Testing out Darkstalker's new fire-shooting weapons, she thought with a wince. All right, Gloomy Snout, Listener said. I can't believe I'm getting ready for the Jubilee in the Queen's own palace. I knew it would be a good idea to make you my best friend. This is going to be the greatest night of all time. It's just another party, Clearsight said, laughing. The Queen seems to have one every other night. There's a full moon, let's celebrate. A second full moon, celebrate again. Her oldest son's hatching day, time for a party. One of her daughters sneezed. Someone alert the chefs, we need a cake. It's kind of exhausting. Oh, you poor thing, Listener said. Living in the palace, eating truffles with the Queen, burdened with all these beautiful necklaces. She cast a sidelong glance at the tangle of jewelry in the wooden box beside Clearsight's mirror. You goose. You can borrow anything you want, Clearsight said. Really? Listener bounded over and started fishing out long, sparkling chains. Ooh, I wonder what Thoughtful would like. Sapphires, do you think? Or moonstones? No, you're wearing moonstones. Again, I might add. Oh, wow, opals. Clearsight touched the moonstone earrings Darkstalker had given her about a month ago.
I thought they'd match your bracelet, he'd said. Aren't they cool?
I love them, she'd answered, cupping them in her talons. They don't have any spells on them, right?
That is such a rude question.
He'd given her his most injured expression.
Thank you so much for your faith in me. You are welcome to check the scroll and see, if you really think I would do that.
No, she'd said, clipping them on. I was just asking. Don't get all huffy. They were beautiful earrings, and they made her feel all sparkly and hopeful, but not in a fake, magical, enchanted way. Still, she did check the scroll later, when he was out picking up dinner, just to be sure, although she felt extremely guilty about it. And there were no moonstone earring spells, so basically she was a terrible dragon for even suspecting him for a moment. Poor Darkstalker. Wait, she said to Listener. Who's Thoughtful? Listener hesitated, holding a web of opals up to her neck. I guess you're going to meet him tonight anyway. She scrunched her eyes shut. He's the dragon I'm going to marry. Fix your face! Fix your face! I'm not making a face, Clearsight objected. I'm having zero visions at all right now, I promise. But aren't we a bit young for marriage plans? I mean one day, after we graduate and I propose. There are a few steps we haven't gotten to yet, but we will. Steps like, Clearsight prompted her. Like doing things together? Listener confessed. And him realizing he loves me? Listener, have you actually ever spoken to this dragon? Clearsight asked. Yes. Listener drew herself up, looking offended, although the effect was muddled by the 16 necklaces she was trying to fit over her head at the same time. He said, "Excuse me, is this the way to the strawberry garden?" And I said, "It certainly is." And he said, "Thank you." And I said, "Are you going to the Jubilee Festival tonight?" And he said, I suppose I have to." And I said, "Cool, see you there." So obviously we are destined to be together forever. Don't you dare tell me otherwise. I wouldn't dream of it, Clearsight said. I didn't say one word about the last disaster, did I? I didn't even let you meet the last one, Listener said. You're thinking of the one before that, and no, you never said anything. You just looked like you'd eaten a bucket full of limes every time you saw him. Clearsight sighed. I don't see what would be wrong with letting me nudge you toward a decent dragon once in a while. I can find my soulmate on my own, thank you very much, said Listener. In fact, I have, and his name is Thoughtful, and he's absolutely dashing. Wonderful, Clearsight said, resolutely not looking at Listener's timelines. She was getting better at that, at avoiding the things she didn't want to see. That was easier to do when she spent most of her time studying the war with the Ice Wings for Queen Vigilance. There were so many small things that could change the course of a battle, or wreck a carefully crafted plan, or spin a formation into panicked chaos. She thought the information she fed the Queen was helping, but it was hard to tell, as the Queen was not exactly prone to effusive gratitude. But at least she'd managed to do enough so far to delay the most horrible new Anima's plans. All right, I'm ready, Listener said. She grinned at Clearsight, twinkling with gemstones and excitement. I hope this dragon is worth it this time, Clearsight thought. Together they hurried to one of the grand balconies and launched themselves into the sky, swooping down toward the plaza below them. Listener found a clear spot to land near the food tents, where the cold air crackled with the smell of roasting meat, sizzling onions, and fried bananas. The Queen's favorite musicians were playing somewhere, but the music was drowned out by all the laughing, chattering dragons. An intricate lacework of wires traced over the whole diamond, hung with paper lanterns that had been painted bright gold and purple and green by the kingdom's dragonettes. But the highlight of the festival was the glasswork competition, in honor of what Queen Vigilance was calling her Glass Jubilee, to celebrate 40 years of her being on the throne. The entire plaza was dotted with elaborate glass sculptures that glowed in the lamplight, twisting spirals, weaving tendrils, and delicate beads mingled with glorious bells and vast shipwrecks, towering trees, and clusters of captured fireworks. Clearsight wished she could run her talons over every smooth or bubbly surface. She wished she could change her scales to the same shimmering colors as the glass, like a rainwing might. Let's go find Fathom, she said. She knew he was here somewhere with Darkstalker. They were supposed to meet near the musicians before midnight, but she wanted to find them sooner. Your pet Sea-Wing, Listener said. Do we have to? He's the sweetest dragon, if you just give him a chance, Clearsight said. And he's lonely here. Especially since Indigo left. He tries to hide it, but he's so sad without her. How could she do that to him? I thought she cared about him as more than a bodyguard. But I guess I was wrong. I highly doubt that, said Listener, considering that you spend practically every waking moment with him. She tossed her head indignantly, but followed Clearsight through the crowd without further complaint. They navigated around a group of dancing nightwings and through a forest of tall, copper-colored glass spikes. Clearsight guessed that Fathom would want to be in the quietest corner of the festival. He was better at handling parties now that he'd been to so many of the Queen's gatherings, but they still made him a little jittery. She was right. Fathom, Darkstalker, and Whiteout were inside one of the game pavilions, playing scales and squares on a small board near the central fire. Lionfish stood guard beside them, watching the nightwings around him with a wary expression. Long white curtains hung around the outside of the pavilion, muffling the noise from the rest of the festival and sheltering the fire and the games from the wind. Listener wrinkled her snout when she saw them. "Playing board games at a festival," she snorted. "How lame can you—" "There he is!" She clutched Clearsight's arm frantically. "What?" Clearsight said, startled. "That's thoughtful," Listener whispered, hiding behind Clearsight's wing. "The one with the scroll tower." Clearsight glanced around the pavilion and finally spotted the dragon Listener was talking about. He was playing a game by himself that involved stacking small marble scrolls into increasingly complex towers according to a set of patterns. As far as lame solitary party games went, it was kind of at the top, frankly. He was handsome, of course, since he had caught Listener's eye, but he had a sort of kindness and worry in his expression that made him different from her usual choices. Silver wires wound around his horns and down his forehead, suspending a circle of glass in front of each of his eyes. He looked tired and very focused on what he was doing. "Isn't he wonderful?" Listener said dreamily. "Oh dear," Clearsight thought, looking at the dragon and feeling the undertow of visions pulling her away. Oh no. 2 clear futures lay before this nightwing. One was easy and unremarkable, a pleasant enough life with someone who loved him more than he loved her, where both of them felt vaguely unsatisfied all the time, but at least nobody died. The second was harder and darker, but in it waited great love, and on it depended futures too far distant for even Clearsight to understand. Listener was not that great love. Unlike her previous crushes, this dragon could actually be hers if nobody intervened, but he shouldn't be. He was meant for someone else. Clearsight slammed a blank expression on her face. "Don't react. Don't let her see what you're thinking. What am I going to do? Do I let Listener have this kind, worried dragon, or do I interfere and disrupt both of their timelines, in ways probably neither of them would thank me for?" "Are you going to say hello?" she asked her friend, in what she thought was a commendably calm voice. Listener shot her a suspicious glance anyway. "Not yet," she said. "I'll give him a chance to notice me and come over first. Let's go say hi to your weirdo friends." Darkstalker looked up as they approached, his whole face alight with joy. "You look like you're winning," Clearsight said, sprawling on the cushion beside him. "I'm winning at life," he said exuberantly, twining his tail around hers. He hadn't looked this happy since Foeslayer was captured, although he'd been gradually coming back to normal every day. She touched his face and wondered if something had happened. Had he enchanted something to make himself feel happier? To help him move on from mourning Foeslayer? If he did, would that be wrong? "In this turn of the hourglass, yes," said Whiteout, moving one of her green scale tokens to capture a black square Fathoms. "But when I crush you with my heart piece, then everything flips." "Don't you even know what you're playing?" Listener asked her. "This game doesn't have a heart piece." "Did you see the sunrise ferns?" Fathom asked Clearsight. "Those were my favorite." "I haven't really looked around yet," she said. "Maybe when you guys are done with this game, we can all go check out the sculptures." "And get something to eat," Darkstalker suggested. "I wouldn't mind, 6 goats on sticks right now." "We don't have time to go anywhere yet, though," Listener said, poking Clearsight meaningfully. "Just go talk to him," Clearsight whispered. "He's already looked at us twice," Listener hissed back. "He'll come over any moment now." "Aha!" Fathom chortled, seizing one of Darkstalker's white squares. I have totally figured out your mystifying game. I am the new Scales and Squares champion. Oh, sorry, friend, Darkstalker said. He hopped a blue scale over 3 of Fathom's squares and swept them off the board. Too slow, so sad. Listener suddenly dug her claws into Clearsight's shoulder. Ow! Clearsight protested. Act normal, Listener barked. Not weird, totally, completely normal. You mean, like you are, Clearsight observed, rubbing her shoulder. Hey, said a deep voice behind her. Clearsight and Darkstalker both turned around, and Fathom looked up. Listener's wings fluttered unconsciously, and she whacked Clearsight's tail with her own about 80 times in rapid succession. Hey, Darkstalker said, sounding guarded. I know you from music class. You're thoughtful, right? Yeah. Thoughtful's gaze bounced off Listener and skidded around the others. I just wondered if anyone wanted to try a Scroll Tower challenge with me. Listener looked as though she had lightning darting along her wings. Maybe, she said coyly, starting to stand up. Arr, Clearsight thought. I have to do it. I have to. Listener's going to kill me. But it's too important, and it'll only get harder if I don't do it right now. I'm Clearsight, she said, smiling at Thoughtful. Our sea-wing friend is Fathom, and... She took a deep breath. And have you met Whiteout? Winner! Whiteout shouted, nearly overturning the board as she hopped one of her scales around it. Empress of all scales and queen of all squares, weep for your tokens, adversaries. She sat up, clapping her talons gleefully, and finally spotted Thoughtful, who was looking at her in a vaguely rapt way. Oh, she said with wonder. Look how shiny you are. Shiny? Listener said, snorting a fake laugh. Whiteout, what are you ever talking about? You made the Cascade of Dreams, Whiteout said, ignoring Listener. She reached out, took one of Thoughtful's talons and squinted at his palm. Words and glass, spun flutes and verse, waterfalls of language and fire-blown claws. What? Listener said uneasily. You noticed, Thoughtful said, tilting his head at Whiteout. No one... You really saw the pieces of scroll inside the waves. Tangerine, Whiteout said. Probability. Spelunking. Okay, now you're literally just saying random words, Listener said. I can't believe you saw them, Thoughtful said. Nobody's ever understood one of my pieces before. I think you should teach me glass-blowing, Whiteout said, and I should teach you clarity. What? Is she being ironic? Listener asked Clearsight. Thoughtful ducked his head, glanced down at the board, and shot a shy smile at Whiteout. How is the Empress of Scales at Scroll Tower? Amazing, said Whiteout. You're going to die of awe. She rose, shook out her strange white wings, and led the way back to the other side of the tent with Thoughtful close beside her, beaming. Clearsight couldn't believe how well that had worked, with such a small nudge from her. They really were destined for each other. Hiding a smile, she turned away from her friends and noticed movement behind one of the curtains. It was Darkstalker's father, Arctic, watching them all with a grim look on his face. What just happened? Listener demanded. Can anyone explain that to me? Don't figure it out, Clearsight prayed. Don't blame me. But before Listener could turn accusing eyes on Clearsight, before anyone could answer her question, before Clearsight could come up with a distraction, a dragon tore through the curtains, vaulted into the pavilion, and drove a spear into Darkstalker's heart. Chapter 25. Fathom. What Fathom saw was a bolt of steel flashing past. He heard curtains rip and listeners screaming and ivory pieces cascading across the wood floor. No, not again. Not again. He saw Darkstalker stagger back, looking stricken. I can't lose anyone else. He saw Lionfish tackle the assassin, who roared and slashed at his face with iron-tipped claws. He leaped forward to help, but by the time he reached Lionfish's side, the attacker was dead. The unfamiliar Nightwing lay at his feet, his neck twisted in a horrible, unnatural way. Darkstalker? Clearsight was still standing, frozen, reaching one talon toward her soulmate. What? How? Fathom took a step back from Lionfish and the dead dragon, and he saw the spear lying on the floor, and he saw that the polished wood was clean, and there was no blood, and then, finally, after all that, he saw that Darkstalker's scales were smooth and unblemished, and his friend was completely unhurt. That's impossible! Listeners shrieked, nearly in hysterics. He killed you! I saw it! He killed you! Darkstalker spread his wings, revealing the glimmer of the ice scales underneath. I guess he missed. He didn't miss. Listener backed away, pointing at Clearsight. You saw it too, didn't you? Didn't you? That spear should have gone right into his heart. Clearsight glanced at the gathering crowd, then at Darkstalker again. I don't know what I saw. Listener roared with frustration, darted out of the pavilion, and shoved her way through the gathering crowd until it swallowed her up. It's nothing, Darkstalker said. Really, he added to all the watching dragons. This pathetic lizard tried to kill me and failed. Nothing to panic about. He stepped over to examine the corpse at Lionfish's feet. I would like to know who this is, though. And why he tried to kill you, Clearsight added. Darkstalker's eyes slanted sideways at Lionfish for a moment. Too bad he's dead and can't answer any questions. Lionfish shrugged. Sorry, he said, without a shred of actual repentance. He looked rather pleased that he'd finally had a chance to do some actual bodyguarding. I don't know him, Clearsight said, edging away from the dead dragon. She looked at the far corner of the pavilion and frowned slightly, as if she'd expected to see someone there. Darkstalker turned to Whiteout and Thoughtful, who had rushed back over. Do either of you know him? I do, Thoughtful said. By reputation, anyway. His name is Quickdeath, and he was... well, you can guess. A killer, for hire, Clearsight said. Are you saying somebody sent him to kill Darkstalker? Darkstalker put one wing around her. But he failed. See, I'm so fine. Don't be scared. Don't be... What if that somebody tries again? Clearsight demanded. She touched her head. I can't see exactly. I feel like there are very bad things branching from here, but they're all blurry. I don't know how they fit together, or what comes from what. We'll figure out who hired Quickdeath, said Darkstalker. That's easy. And then we stop them from trying again. His eyes went cold and hard, like onyx beads. Trust me, that'll be even easier. Fathom had never seen his friend look so much like his grandfather. He shivered and sank onto one of the cushions, realizing that his wings were shaking. He had to keep it together, especially in front of all these Nightwings. It seemed as though hundreds of them were emerging from the dark, pressing toward the edge of the pavilion to see what the commotion was. Everyone stared at Darkstalker, whispering to one another. How had he survived? What had stopped the spear? Lionfish poked Fathom. We should get you back to the castle, he said, in case there's a second attack. He wasn't after me, Fathom pointed out. Maybe not this time, he said, but let's get somewhere safe, just in case. Yes, Darkstalker interjected. I'd like to get out of here as well. He nudged Quickdeath's body with one talon, frowning, as though he were wondering whether he could do something useful with it. Thoughtful, can you stay here and watch the body,
until we send someone from the Queen's Guard to investigate.
Sure, said Thoughtful. I'll stay with him, said Whiteout. Protect him from angry spirits. Thoughtful cast an uneasy glance at the ceiling, as if Quick Death's ghost might be hovering there with its claws outstretched. Half in a daze, Fathom followed Darkstalker and Clearsight out of the pavilion. The crowd of dragons fell back before them, most of them averting their eyes, others staring openly. A pair of small dragonettes took one look at Darkstalker and fled with little shrieks of alarm.
"What was that for?" Darkstalker muttered grumpily. "I'm the one that got attacked."
But Fathom understood. He, too, felt a layer of fear spreading underneath his worry for his friend. The more he thought about it, the more he couldn't make the pieces fit. He was sure that spear had been aimed straight and true at Darkstalker's heart. How could Quick Death have missed so completely? And then why was the spear lying in front of Darkstalker, as if it had bounced off, instead of somewhere beyond him? A horrible suspicion was growing inside him. Darkstalker had used his magic again, somehow, even though Fathom had begged him not to. He eyed the pieces of jewelry the Nightwing was wearing, something that would protect you from any attack. He saw the appeal, of course. He had often wished he could make something like that for Indigo before she left. But was it worth protecting someone on the outside if doing so made yourself more dangerous on the inside? They flew back to Fathom's room in the palace, where Lionfish went inside first to make sure it was safe. Worf was somewhere down in the festival, probably blissfully unaware that he might have been useful tonight.
"All clear,"
Lionfish said, holding the door open.
"You can go,"
Darkstalker said to him brusquely.
"Back to the festival, or wherever."
Lionfish shook his head, his expression vaguely surprised.
"I'm not supposed to leave Fathom alone," he said. "Indigo's orders."
"He won't be alone," said Darkstalker impatiently. "He'll be with me. And if Indigo was so worried, she wouldn't have flown off and left him, right?" Fathom winced.
"Yeah,"
Lionfish said slowly, as though he hadn't thought of that before.
"Good point."
"It's all right, Lionfish," Fathom said. "I'll be safe with them." Lionfish shrugged and left without any further argument. As soon as they were safely behind closed doors, Clearsight whirled on Darkstalker. "What did you do?" she demanded.
Survived a deadly assassination attempt," Darkstalker said. "Hooray for me?"
"Listener was right," she said. "That spear hit you exactly in the heart. There's no way you should have survived it."
"You sound awfully disappointed," Darkstalker snapped back. "Is that why you didn't warn me that was going to happen? Because you were hoping it would succeed?"
Her face twisted in outrage. "You jerk," she cried. "I don't know everything, all right? Minor timelines sometimes become reality before I know it, especially if someone is trying to surprise me. And I'm glad you're not dead. But I want to know when you made yourself invulnerable, and why you didn't tell me about it." Fathom crossed the room and started digging in his trunk as they argued. There was something he had to know.
"Isn't the more important question, who tried to kill me?" Darkstalker shouted. "Shouldn't we all be like, wow, great idea, Darkstalker. We're so glad you're alive. Now let's get on with hunting down the actual bad dragon in this situation."
He turned toward Fathom with his wings spread wide, as if looking for reassurance, and found Fathom pointing the Soul Reader at him.
"Seriously," Darkstalker shouted. "I'm the good guy here. What is wrong with you?"
"You shouldn't have used your magic," Fathom said, scrunching his eyes to fight back his tears. "That's a huge spell, invulnerability. It could have tipped you over all by itself." The hourglass was spinning. Slowly, slowly, white and black grains mingling and diverging. "Please be good," Fathom prayed. "Please, please, please don't lose your soul."
"Well, it didn't," Darkstalker snapped. "It so happens I enchanted my skulls before I made the Soul Reader. So you'll find that your little hourglass will give you the exact same result as last time. But thank you all so much for your faith in me."
The hourglass stopped. Fathom realized that Clearsight was studying it as intently as he was. If Darkstalker hadn't used his magic since the last reading, it should show the same balance of white and black sand. Did it? Fathom blinked. He wasn't sure. Was it just his imagination, or were there more white grains of sand this time than last time? Did the hourglass tilt a little more than before? Had the balance shifted slightly toward evil? Maybe he was being paranoid. It wasn't a big difference, certainly. The black sand still outweighed the white sand. So why did Clearsight look troubled as well?
"There," Darkstalker said. "See? Now, can we get on with tracking down my killer?"
"Not with magic," Fathom said quickly.
"I know that's what you're thinking. Please, Darkstalker, we can find another way. You don't need to spend your magic on this." "It's a tiny little spell," Darkstalker said dismissively, "and then we'll know for sure. Are you picturing us as stalwart detectives, following leads and interrogating suspects? I don't have time for that. If we're going to figure this out before he tries again."
"You think you already know who it was," Clearsight said. She was pacing in front of the fireplace, her wings shaking.
"Isn't it obvious?" Darkstalker asked. "He's wanted me dead since the moment I hatched."
Clearsight hesitated. Darkstalker's expression, watching her, seemed to be waiting for something. "He was there," she said finally. "I saw him."
"Who?"
Fathom asked.
"My father," Darkstalker said. "I know. I heard his brain muttering." "But if he was there, why didn't he come over to make sure you were all right?"
Fathom said, feeling as if he was missing something.
"Why didn't he jump in to stop quick death?"
He felt a deep stab of the grief he usually kept buried.
"That's what my father would have done." "Because he hired quick death," Darkstalker said. "You're really slowing this conversation down, Fathom."
"Did you hear him think that?" Clearsight asked. "When you heard his thoughts, was there anything about the assassin or wanting you dead?"
Darkstalker thought for a moment. "No more than usual. What I caught mostly had to do with my sister. Father hated the way she was looking at Thoughtful. He's probably the one who needs to watch out for assassins next."
"So maybe it wasn't Arctic," Clearsight said. "Wouldn't he be thinking about it if he knew it was about to happen?"
"Not necessarily."
Darkstalker plucked a stalk of bamboo from one of Fathom's tall vases and started methodically shredding it.
"Besides, I stopped listening to him after the first few grumbles."
He flung a piece of bamboo into the corner.
"I'm sure it was him. But we can all be sure if I do a spell to find out." "No!" Fathom cried. "Please don't. Think about your soul. Clearsight, you agree with me, don't you?"
Clearsight looked between them for a moment, rubbing her forehead. "You should tell him about the scroll," she said to Darkstalker.
"Really?"
He looked surprised.
"You think that's a good idea?"
"I think it's safe," she said. "As far as I can tell, you show it to him in all of the good timelines."
"And the bad," he pointed out.
"He's not the one who turns them bad," she said quietly.
Darkstalker scowled at her. "Your faith in me is so heartwarming."
While they argued, Fathom went to tuck the soul reader back in his trunk, and as he did, he saw a flicker of movements under his blankets. A small white tentacle lifted one corner, and small dark eyes peeked out at him.
"Blob!"
Fathom covered the little octopus quickly, although he wasn't entirely sure why he was hiding him from his friends.
Why is Blob still here?
He knew that Indigo had flown away without most of her stuff. He'd guessed she was in a hurry to leave before he got back, but he'd always thought she'd taken Blob with her. If she hadn't, what did that mean?
Did she leave him as a message to me? To make sure I know she wants nothing more to do with me?
That didn't seem like something she would do. She loved Blob, didn't she?
Fathom, Darkstalker said behind him. I'm trying to tell you something totally momentous over here. It'll change your life. Trust me.
Fathom turned to his friend with a smile, but his heart was starting to whisper anxiously. Why did Indigo decide to leave without Blob? Was there something else going on?
Is there something I'm missing? And how can I find out what it is?
Chapter 26. Darkstalker. The sun was sliding cold yellow claws over the eastern horizon as Darkstalker flew home from the palace. Below him, the detritus of the festival was being swept away by a busy flurry of worker dragons. Soon, only the paper lanterns and the gleaming shapes of the glass sculptures would remain. He spotted one dragon, industriously scrubbing out the game pavilion, even though Quick Death had died bloodlessly and his body had been removed. Darkstalker beat his wings to rise higher, as close to the sun as he could manage. His talk with Fathom had not gone exactly as he'd imagined. He'd expected a little more excitement, a little more gratitude. He'd expected that Fathom would be thrilled to find a way to use his powers without damaging the soul he worried so much about. He'd rather expected Fathom to make his very own Animus scroll right then and there. But instead, his friend had remained stubbornly unconvinced.
It could still be affecting you, he argued.
Darkstalker could see the images piling up in Fathom's mind, Albatross stabbing the queen, the dead bodies of his parents, the blood everywhere. Every time Fathom thought about his Animus powers, that was straight where his mind went: massacres and devastation, and the loss of nearly your entire family. Not only that, but tonight his mind was suddenly occupied with the mystery of some kind of octopus. Fathom's thoughts were all indigo, 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 again, just when they'd been starting to get interesting. He spent more of their conversation thinking about her than focusing on the wonderful news Darkstalker was telling him. And, as he often did, he forgot to even worry about Darkstalker reading his mind. Finally, Fathom had rubbed his eyes, shaking his head fiercely.
Nobody knows exactly how Animus magic works. The only safe option is to avoid using it at all. Why would we have this power if we're never supposed to use it?
Darkstalker had shouted in frustration, which was when Clearsight had decided it was time for everyone to go home and get some sleep.
Whatever. If Fathom doesn't want to listen to reason, that's his problem. My problem is that someone tried to kill me tonight.
He set his jaw grimly. There were plenty of future timelines where Arctic tried to kill him, but not many where he succeeded. Still, there were a few, even with Darkstalker's invulnerability. Now that Arctic surely knew about that, he'd have to plan his next attack on Darkstalker more carefully. Maybe even use his own magic. Arctic, in fact, might be the only dragon in the kingdom who could actually kill Darkstalker.
He should have used his power to do it right the first time. So why didn't he? Because he didn't want anyone to know it was him who killed me, right?
Darkstalker soared down toward his front door, which was just starting to turn from gray to red as the light of the sun reached it. All the flowers in their miniature hanging gardens were dead. No one had gone anywhere near them since losing Mother. He pushed open the door and found Whiteout lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling with her wings flopped out to either side of her. She was wearing one of the trinkets from the festival, a black rope necklace with a golden glass seashell pendant, turning it between her claws. He wondered if Thoughtful had bought it for her.
"Good morning,"
he said, nudging his sister's tail affectionately.
"Dreaming of your new admirer."
"Thoughtful," she said, a statement rather than a question. "Yes and no. I do like him."
"Do you want me to try to foresee what will happen with you two?"
Darkstalker asked. He still wasn't as good at this as Clearsight. He tended to see the most probable outcomes, and everything else was usually muddled by random events and small deviations. Perhaps if he had a lot of time to devote to studying all the futures, the way she did, He'd be able to follow them more clearly. But who had that kind of time, or that kind of focus? He'd have to be trapped underground for months with nothing else to do. "No, thank you," said Whiteout, which was such an ordinary response that Darkstalker peered at her curiously. "Are you all right?" he asked, touching her neck. It didn't feel warmer than it should. "I feel funny," she said. "All my words are coming out wrong." Actually, it seemed as if they were coming out right for once, which was worrying. Darkstalker wished that he could read her mind and see what was going on in there. "Maybe you just need some sleep," he said. A small clatter from one of the back rooms distracted him. "Is father here?" She nodded. Darkstalker stepped quietly down the hall until he was standing in the doorway to his father's room. Foeslayer's side of it still looked exactly the same, everything untouched, except perhaps her blankets, which looked as though someone had been lying on them. But it was freezing cold in the room, with actual icicles hanging around Arctic's sleeping spot. He must have been using his frost breath to make the room a bit more to his own liking. Arctic had his back to Darkstalker, fiddling with something at his desk. Fragments of ice were scattered around his feet, and a piece of parchment that looked like a map stuck out from under his tail. "Can't wait much longer," his brain muttered. "Not sure this will be enough, though." "I'm alive," Darkstalker announced, "in case you were worried." Arctic stiffened, then cast an evil glance over his shoulder at his son. "Can't say that I was." "I know you were there," Darkstalker said. "At the pavilion, watching." "Indeed," said Arctic, turning back to his work. "Care to explain how that spear bounced off your scales?" "This one gets more dangerous all the time," he thought. "Maybe I should do what Mother wants." "Did you know the dragon who attacked me?" Darkstalker asked, instead of answering. His father shrugged. "I've seen him around court, but never spoken to him. I'm not interested in knowing every common Nightwing in the tribe." Darkstalker paused, waiting for Quick Death's name to appear in Arctic's thoughts, but it didn't. Arctic had a brief memory of passing Quick Death in the halls of the palace, and that was it. Could Darkstalker be wrong? Or had Arctic finally developed the strength to shield some of his thoughts? "Why do you think he tried to kill me?" he tried. Arctic snorted. "Because you're an arrogant fool. Because you flaunt your magic and don't care who you offend. Because you insulted his mother, or stole his prey, or cheated off his test, or read his mind when he told you not to. I can think of a million possible reasons, but what does it matter? He's dead now, isn't he?" "That idiot," Arctic thought, flicking his tail. He should have known it wouldn't be that easy to kill an animus dragon. Couldn't have gotten me that way either, not if I was wearing my shielding earring. Darkstalker tipped his head. He hadn't known that his father had a shielding earring. He wondered which one it was, the light blue diamond in his left ear or the silver narwhal in his right. More important, these didn't sound like the thoughts of a dragon who'd just tried to have him killed. Arctic seemed more disinterested than anything else. "You're probably right," Darkstalker said, backing out of the doorway and heading to his own room. Behind him, he heard Arctic swivel around again, thinking, "Now that was suspicious. What does he mean I'm probably right? What's that dragon hiding?" And then, a few moments later, as Darkstalker was unlocking his door, Arctic thought, "Better act soon, before anyone can stop me." Darkstalker paused, listening, but Arctic's thoughts didn't elaborate further. Maybe he wasn't the one who hired Quick Death, Darkstalker thought, but it certainly sounds like he's still planning to kill me eventually. Darkstalker locked the door behind him and started pacing up and down in his room. He wished Clearsight were here to help him figure out what to do next. What would she see Arctic doing if she looked ahead in his timeline? Although he had to admit his faith in her powers was shaken by the attack tonight, why hadn't she seen it coming? Who could have known enough to trick her foresight that way? And his, for that matter. He'd have to find out later what evil scheme was circling around Arctic's head, Right now, all that interested him was finding his would-be killer. Who besides Arctic might want Darkstalker dead? He paused next to his desk, thinking of the last dragon who had dared to threaten his life. He remembered the cold prick of steel at his throat, the tension that hummed through her wings whenever he walked into the room, her dark blue eyes, always watching him, as though he was the one who posed a danger to fathom.
Dragons who try to kill me don't fare too well, do they, Sea-Wing?
He swept the clutter off his desk. Sorry, Clearsight. He had promised her he'd wait before doing any spell, that she could be there if he decided to do it, but he didn't want to wait. He hated the idea that someone was out there wishing for his death, planning to kill him, planning to derail all his glorious futures and blink all his dragonettes out of existence. How dare they? He needed to find out who they were and punish them. Whoever it was had to know immediately that they couldn't do this to him and get away with it. They had to suffer the consequences as soon as possible. He was the most powerful dragon in Pyria. He should act like it. He took his scroll and his secret inkwell out of their hiding place, rolled it to the newest blank spread, and weighted down the corners with little statues. Next, he pulled out a scrap of parchment and set it on top of the scroll. He dipped one claw in the red ink and wrote, "Enchant this parchment to reveal the name of the dragon who hired Quickdeath to kill me tonight." As he carefully wiped the ink off his claw, jagged red letters began to appear on the parchment, slowly scrawling a name across the stark white page. Darkstalker froze as he realized what it said. Oh yes, there are definitely going to be consequences. Now I know who has to pay. Chapter 27. Clearsight. Clearsight slept very poorly that morning, troubled by nightmares of horrible futures, betrayals and murders, and war without end. It seemed as though all her worst possible visions were crowding through her head at once. She woke up with massive pain in her temples and jaw, as though she'd been clenching her teeth all night. The sun stabbed sharply through a gap in the thick curtains, pouncing on her eyeballs and setting them ablaze. She covered her head with a pillow and tried to find a timeline with an instant miracle cure for headaches in it. Drinking water would help, so would breakfast. Hiding under the covers for the rest of the day would not. She got up, taking deep breaths, and adjusted her moonstone earrings, which had slipped half off in the night. She had to remember, sometimes dreams were just dreams, not visions of the future. Even if it felt like the end of the world, the argument last night didn't have to be the beginning of a horrible spiral into darkness. And if it was, she could stop it. She wouldn't let the darkness come for her and her friends. As long as Darkstalker listened to her, and he would, in almost every timeline she could see now, everything would be all right. Clearsight stumbled to the window that looked over the inner courtyards of the palace. She twitched the curtains aside and peered out at the garden below. It was after midday, and not many dragons were down there, but she spotted a line of royal guards blocking off one section, and beyond them, a pair of Nightwings, walking and talking close together. One was obviously the queen, the other... Clearsight recognized the long neck and sharp-edged bones from afar. That was all-knowing. Queen Vigilance's fired seer. What was she doing here? Clearsight rubbed her eyes and splashed water on her face, then hurried down to the garden, taking the stairs instead of flying, so it wouldn't look as if she was swooping in on the Queen's private conversation. The guard saw her coming, and one of them called to the Queen, "Your other seer is here, Your Majesty." Queen Vigilance poked her head around a rose bush and eyed Clearsight. "I see," she said. "Any new visions?" "Not about the war, Your Majesty," Clearsight said with a bow. "Not in the last day. My previous predictions still stand." "Really?" said the Queen. She beckoned Clearsight forward until the three of them, Vigilance, Clearsight, and All-Knowing were ensconced inside the rose bower. All-Knowing smirked down at Clearsight. Her flicking tail caught a few yellow roses and ripped them loose, scattering petals like drops of gold everywhere. "So," the Queen hissed to Clearsight, "a question for you. Have you ever had any visions about your truly beloved?" "About... you mean about Darkstalker?" Clearsight blinked with surprise. Of course she'd had hundreds, thousands of visions about Darkstalker, including several the Queen would surely quite like to know about, but those were the ones that weren't going to happen. She could still tell part of the truth, though. "Most of my visions about Darkstalker have to do with our future together," she hedged. "I've had visions of our dragonettes, of our future home near the palace, of the ways in which we both keep using our powers to serve you." "And have you seen how I die?" the Queen demanded. Chills slid along Clearsight's neck and spread through her scales. What had All-Knowing told her? "I've seen a few possibilities," she said carefully. "Oh, yes," said the Queen. "Not worth mentioning, were they?" "They're all so far into the future," Clearsight protested. "It'll be another 10 years before one of your daughters has the courage to challenge you, and the probability of her winning is very low." Said Queen Vigilance. Her suspicious look encompassed both of her seers now. "And of all my death scenes, which comes the soonest?" Clearsight tried. She closed her eyes and concentrated as hard as she could, looking for the darkest paths, which made her realize she hadn't had any visions of Darkstalker in his twisted crown for at least a month. She'd hoped, that meant it had fallen out of the realm of possibility, that maybe Darkstalker's recent contentment was real and everyone was going to be safe. Now, searching for it as intently as she could, flashes began appearing behind her eyes. Darkstalker, the crown, the dead queen. But she couldn't keep them there. They flashed away as soon as she tried to look at them or piece them into the web of the future. "Don't hurt yourself," All-Knowing sneered. Clearsight opened her eyes and looked at her former teacher. How could All-Knowing have a vision of Darkstalker doing something terrible when Clearsight couldn't see it? "Share your mumbo-jumbo," Queen Vigilance ordered her former seer, flicking All-Knowing in the face with her tail. All-Knowing cleared her throat and fluffed her wings importantly. "Hatched of ice and hatched of night, cursed with moons all shining bright, longs for power not his own, comes to steal your very throne." Queen Vigilance snorted. "Remarkably clear, for the first time ever." Her pitch-black eyes narrowed at Clearsight. "Any of that ring a bell?" "She's making it up," Clearsight protested. "Darkstalker wouldn't do that." "Why should I believe?" "Leave you," the Queen demanded, furious now. "You're so enchanted by him that you wouldn't tell me even if he was a threat, would you?" "I don't have to," Clearsight cried. "He's really not—" She broke off suddenly. "Enchanted by him. Am I?" Her talons went slowly to her earrings. "But I checked the scroll, and yet I didn't notice an invulnerability spell in there either. If he can keep one spell a secret from me, he could have done another. But how? It would have to be in the scroll, wouldn't it? The chills had become a cold, gusting wind of terror. Had he been lying to her all along? Did he really keep some of his animus power in his own claws? But surely she would have seen it in some future, if that were true. She fumbled to unclip the earrings, dropping them with small plinks on the ground. And visions rushed in, visions upon visions upon visions, all the darkness she'd ever seen, but worse, and worse, and worse, and worse. Darkstalker murdering the queen and stealing the throne, Nightwings fleeing by the thousands, the city burning, the ground shaking, Darkstalker in his crown laughing and killing with ease. These weren't visions of the distant future either. These were about to happen, now. The tipping point was trembling on a knife's edge. If Clearsight could do anything to stop it, she didn't have a moment to lose. "It was you," she said to the queen, bewildered. "You sent the assassin after Darkstalker." "After I heard her prophecy," the queen said, tipping her head at all-knowing. "How could I not?" "You fool!" Clearsight cried. "You're the one making it happen. He wouldn't have. He might not. But now. But now." She took a step backward. He was coming. It was all coming, all the bad things rushing their way. "I have to go." "No," said the queen sharply. "I won't let you conspire with him any more. Guards, lock her up," she shouted. Burly Nightwing guards pounced from behind the rose bushes, as if they'd been lying in wait for this moment, but Clearsight saw them coming. All at once, the future was spread clearly over the present, as it hadn't been since she put the earrings on, and she saw where the guards would be to grab her, and she saw how to twist away and her escape path into the sky, and she took it, winging free in one wild heartbeat. "I'm the only one who can stop him," she shouted to the queen's furious upturned face. "And I will. I promise I will." She evaded the talons that reached for her and the wings that blocked her way, diving and dodging until she was over the palace wall and soaring down toward the great diamond. A moment later, new wing beats came up alongside her, and she nearly lashed out before she realized with a surge of relief that it was Fathom, glowing emerald green in the sunlight. "What happened?" he called. "I heard shouting. I saw you and the queen out my window. Are you all right?" "We have to stop Darkstalker," she cried. "He's on his way here to kill the queen." "What?" Fathom's wings faltered. "Now? Why?" With one of his secret spells. "Where is she?" "I see him," Fathom cried, adjusting his flight path. Darkstalker was beating his way toward the palace, menace radiating from every scale. Not many Nightwings were out now, in the middle of the day, but those that were swerved wildly to get out of his way, then gathered to whisper together as he passed. "I knew the whole tribe would know who we were one day," Clearsight thought. "But I wanted us to be their saviors, not for everyone to be scared of him." "Darkstalker!" she yelled. He paused and hovered in place, looking around as she and Fathom swooped up to him. She saw his gaze move to her ears, and she saw him realize that she'd taken off the earrings. He knew that she knew what he'd done. His face set into lines of defiance. She pointed to the roof of the library, and the three of them soared down to land on an open flat spot between the graceful spires. "I'm not going to let you kill the queen," she said, as their talons touched down. "She started it," Darkstalker said, his mouth quirking unbelievably into a little smile. "She's an idiot," Clearsight said. "But we can stop her from trying again. We can go back to the way things were." "Yes, please, Darkstalker," Fathom said, pressing his front talons together. "Can you really see that?" Darkstalker asked Clearsight. "She'll never trust either of us. You'll always be in danger, and therefore so will I, because I care about you,
and Vigilance will use that against me.
He paused, looking her over.
Unless I enchant your scales too.
His talons reached for a bag slung around his neck, and Clearsight realized with a jolt that he must have his scroll with him, so he can use his magic on the Queen. No, she said, so sharply that Darkstalker and Fathom both winced. I don't want any more spells on me, Darkstalker. I can't believe you betrayed me like that.
Like what? He said innocently.
The earrings, she cried. You put a secret spell on me. You messed with my power, Darkstalker. Don't you see how wrong that is? Fathom took a step back, his face crumpling into shock and sorrow.
Oh,
Darkstalker said, flipping his tail dismissively.
That was such a little spell. I just wanted to keep you focused on the happy futures, like we talked about. I knew you couldn't do it on your own, no matter how much you promised me you would. So the earrings faded back all the dark paths, that's all. I was only trying to make you happier, Clearsight.
He tipped his head, looking for a moment as though he really meant it, as if he cared about her more than anything and had been trying to help. He might actually believe that. But the truth is, he was just making his life easier. He didn't want me standing in his way as he went down those dark paths. That's why I didn't see quick death coming, Clearsight said. Between the earrings and all-knowing trying to trick me, that's how I was taken by surprise. What if all my predictions about the war had been wrong too, Darkstalker? While I'm handing out all these rose-colored prophecies, dragons could die in the real future.
I was double-checking your work, he said, smiling. Don't worry.
You arrogant porcupine, she shouted.
This has been delightful, he said. His wings flared open. But I have a queen to kill.
Stop! Clearsight leaped at him, tumbling him backward on the roof until she had him pinned down. I'm not going to let you do that. Darkstalker looked up at her, and she saw with a shiver of fear that he was genuinely puzzled.
Why not? He asked. I'll be a great king. Can't you see that? We'll be the strongest tribe in Pyria. Our kingdom could stretch from shore to shore. You and me, side by side, bringing harmony to the whole continent, with our dragonettes inheriting the throne after we're gone.
After we're gone, she said bitterly. You won't ever let that happen. It's a short step from invulnerability to an immortality spell. Have you done it already? His silence answered that question. Darkstalker was immortal now, which was one of the most important things Clearsight was supposed to prevent to protect the future. Was there any hope left? A vision trembled through her mind, rumbling up from below and gathering strength like a volcano. There was only one way to stop Darkstalker from killing the Queen right now, and it might not save Vigilance in the future, and it definitely led to more bloodshed, but it would give them at least a moment to think if she took this path. If she told him what was happening at this moment while his back was turned. Then she saw that she didn't have to. The vision was sweeping over him as well. He sat up abruptly, knocking her away.
White out,
he said in a strangled voice. Your father has her, Clearsight said, touching her forehead. He's taken her, and they're flying.
North,